新しい風を見た。まっしぐらインテグラホンダ出るのかな。
In 1985, a very important new car helped to establish several things. A car that, throughout its life, landed on Car and Driver's 10 Best list no less than 8 times. It was responsible for introducing the brand new luxury sports arm of Honda in the United States. It fought back against tariffs and limitations on imported cars from the American government. It was the genesis of one of the most hallowed names in tuning culture, Integra. Now, some of you may think that I'm making this video in light of the reveal of the new Integra, which is slated for a 2023 model year release. While this helps, the main reason I'm making this video is actually because, well, I own one. But I'll be discussing that in a future video. Either way, let's get into what made the Integra so special, how it became such an icon, and a bit of my thoughts on the new version. Let's get into it.
An infrared transmitter opens the door and permits contact.
Now, I'm sure you all know this part of the story, so I'll keep this brief. In the early 1980s, America decided to limit the amount of Japanese cars imported per year to help the suffering domestic manufacturers. During that time, and most would say even today, Japanese economy cars were just, well, better than what our domestics had to offer. They were more reliable, they had better build quality, they were sportier, and all at generally a better price. I mean, come on, look at a 1979 Chevrolet Chevette next to a 1979 Toyota Celica. Is it even a contest? To prevent Japanese manufacturers from completely bankrupting Detroit, they imposed a seriously strict limit on how many cars Japan could import over to United States shores. This was a big problem for Japanese manufacturers. The cars that were flying out of showroom floors at the time were economy cars that needed to sell at high volumes to make a good profit. So the big three Japanese manufacturers, Honda, Toyota, and Nissan, all spawned luxury manufacturers that they could export and sell for more money. Toyota formed Lexus, Nissan formed Infiniti, and Honda, of course, formed Acura. And to introduce the Acura name, one of the cars they released was the first generation Acura Integra, also known as the DA generation. The Integra was focused more on being an entry-level small luxury car at this point as opposed to the true driving experience that it developed into. When it was first released in 1985, one of the most astounding features of this car, and one that carried through all the way until the very last Integra, was the stellar handling. On curvy roads, it felt like a true sports car. It came with various 1.5 and 1.6 liter 4-cylinders, including 2 variants of the single jingle every Honda guy loves, the D series. The engine to have, and in my personal opinion one of the most underappreciated power plants ever produced, was the dual overhead cam ZC motor. It was the most powerful option for the first generation Integra, making a whopping, well, 113 horsepower. It sounded killer doing it though. Fun fact, the DA Integra also came badged as a Rover 416i in Australia. The second generation Integra was where we started to see it develop into more of a sports car. While it did lose the pop-up headlights, it ushered in the introduction of the very first VTEC motors ever produced. The 1.8 liter B18A1, starring in the RSI and XSI trims, still reigns today as one of the best sounding, most versatile, and strongest revving 4-cylinders ever made. This motor made 158 horsepower and came paired with a 5-speed manual. The RSI was stripped down and was more focused on driving fun, with earlier versions sporting tighter gear ratios and a lack of creature comforts, featuring things such as wind-up windows. But in North America, we actually got our own special model. If you were in the know and saw this badge on the back of a second-gen Integra, you knew it meant business. This trim was the GSR. It used a 1.7 liter VTEC version of the B series, making 160 horsepower. It also came with a 5-speed manual and wider 195mm tires. There were less than 5,000 of these second-gen GSR models produced, shared between the United States and Canada. If you find a well-maintained one for a good price, I would recommend scooping it up quickly. And now we segue into what most people imagine when they hear Integra. DC2 saw a complete reworking of the entire car, featuring more modern and flowing lines, especially with the American front fascia. It introduced the second generation B18B series of motors. USDM trims went as follows. There was the RS, or regular sport, which was available in both hatchback and sedan. Came with the previously mentioned B18B1 dual overhead cam engine. It put out roughly 140 horsepower and 127 pound-feet of torque. In 1997, power ratings dropped to 138 horsepower and 124 pound-feet of torque due to US emissions regulations. Standard features were a cassette player, rear window defroster, and tilt steering wheel. Cassette players were replaced with CD players in 1997. The RS models, as well as Type Rs, did not come with sunroofs as an option, while the LS, SE, GS, and GSR submodels did. Then there was the LS, or Luxury Sport. This model was available in both hatchback and sedan, and featured full leather, power windows, a sunroof, and other luxury goodies. It's also the model of Integra that I own. Then there was the Special Edition, which was also available in hatchback and sedan starting from 1995. This trim is only available in 95 and 96 model years until it was changed to the GS in 1997. From the LS, it adds leather seats, alloy wheels on all ears, and an optional rear spoiler. Then there was the GS, which isn't of much note, seeing as it was just an SE with a rear spoiler from the LS. And now we reach the third generation VTEC model, the GSR. Utilizing the newly reworked B18C1, it made 170 horsepower and 178 pound-feet of torque. Inside, it was essentially a GS with leather seats as an option, which still gives you an ergonomic and handsome instrument panel and high-quality materials for an economy car. I can provide a bit more insight on the third generation, seeing as it's the one I own, so let me do that for a minute here. First off, it's not super tall people friendly. I'm 6'1" on a good day and lucky that I don't have extremely long legs, because if I did, it wouldn't be the most comfortable thing. And if you're much taller, you're going to need to call your Miata friend to help get some foam out of the seat. Second off, parts are absolutely everywhere. At this point, it's damn near impossible to find an import parts retailer that doesn't sell an excessive amount of third-gen Integra parts. It's gotten to the point where genuine quality products are even showing up on Amazon and eBay. I've bought several things from both of those places, and all of which have served me decently well, but be wary and read reviews, of course. But also keep in mind that people who have a problem with the product are going to be much more inclined to write a review than someone who bought the product and it works as intended, so take that with a grain of salt. Okay, Big Brother moment over. It's time to move on to the absolute holy grail of Integras. Some still say it's the best front-wheel drive car ever made. The DC2 Integra Type R. This seam-welded, 200 horsepower marvel of engineering set the standard for the highest performance front-wheel drive cars for years, and some would argue in some ways that it continues to do so. To say this car punched above its weight is an understatement. Option Video documented the Type R keeping up with the absolute best that Japan had to offer. Skyline GTRs, Toyota Supras, and Mazda RX-7s to name a few. And, for once, we actually got it here in the United States. It was introduced in '97, and for a time it was the fastest front-wheel drive car in the United States, full stop. And because we got it here, I would attribute this car as one of the main reasons why American manufacturers started taking sports compact cars more seriously. Without it, we probably wouldn't have cars like the SRT4 and the Chevy Cobalt SS. It was the cheapest way to keep up with Corvettes and Porsches and the Twisties, and, although unfortunately prices are skyrocketing now, it will still hold its own against modern contemporary sports cars even today. Okay, I think that's enough swooning over the third gen for a minute. Let's move on to the fourth generation of Integra. But as us Americans know it, the Acura RSX. See, around that time, Acura decided to give all of its cars boring alphanumeric names. So what was sold as the Integra in Japan was known as the RSX over here. The RSX was seen as a bit of a departure from the Integra recipe. They removed the fully independent suspension system, which was a cornerstone of Integras for generations. But what it did introduce was the K-Series motor. While being more electronic and finicky than the B-Series, the engine in the base model made 160 horsepower, and the Type S version made 200, which was just as potent as the B-Series. It wasn't all bad with the RSX, of course, as in Japan they did make a Type R version. was really fun, sitting at 217 horsepower. But reports show that it couldn't really keep up in corners with the DC2 Integra Type R. I've decided to keep my thoughts on the new Integra generally to myself for fear of getting my ass beat, but other than that, that seems to wrap up the video. The Integra is an absolutely legendary car that I still don't see talked about as much as it deserves. Without it, we wouldn't have had the FK8 Civic Type R in the United States at all. I hope I did my part in educating a few people, and delivering this nameplate the respect it deserves.